The apocalypse. When an entire people are destroyed or destroy themselves. The end of civilization. For us today, as we go about our daily lives, it's barely something we consider. We're so sure it couldn't happen to us. But for some civilizations, it already has. The Bronze Age. Between 3,300 and 1,200 BCE, some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen rose to power. The Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the all-powerful Egyptian Empire.
Up until this point in history, there had been no human beings with more power than these pharaohs. They controlled wealth, gold, wheat, grain, animals. Every aspect of life along the Nile was under their control.
From North Africa to Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, civilization flourished. But in 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age period of history collapsed. The great civilizations imploded, and a dark age engulfed the region. It lasted for 300 years.
The central economy goes away, the elite go away, we get population migration. Basically, everything that had been good and great about the previous era now disappears. We go into a dark age.
But in the ruins of these once mighty empires lie clues behind what and who was to blame for the end of an entire period of history. Evidence from archaeological sites across this region point to wave after wave of invasion from the sea. Hordes of marauders razing entire cities to the ground, right at the point the Bronze Age collapse occurred. They've become known as the Sea People.
There's a series of about 8 or 9 letters which describe in increasing levels of urgency that they are frightened about raiders.
The enemy ships are already here. They've set fire to my towns and have done very great damage in the country.
We ask the question, who were the Sea People, and are they responsible for the end of the Bronze Age? In Syria's agricultural heartland, a farmer uncovers something incredible. The entrance to a tomb. No one could know it now, but this tomb will lead to the discovery of a previously unknown civilization and provide a crucial clue for investigating the collapse of the Bronze Age. The farmer reports it to the authorities. At the time, Syria was governed by France. They turned to experts at the Louvre in Paris. Archaeologist Claude Schaeffer is tasked to investigate.
Schaeffer was a French archaeologist. He's the curator of the Prehistoric and Gallo-Roman Museum at Strasbourg, and he's already written extensively about Bronze Age burial mounds. He's the obvious man for the job.
Schaeffer and his team arrive in Medinet Habu, a port on the northwest coast of Syria, very close to where the tomb was uncovered. They waste no time. Under Schaeffer's supervision, the team begins excavating the tomb.
Within days, it becomes clear they haven't just discovered a lone burial site, they've discovered a whole ancient cemetery. And it dates to the end of the Bronze Age.
The discovery of a cemetery makes it highly likely to Schaeffer that a significant ancient city is also close by. It's promising news. Who knows what riches it might hold? Could it shed light on the cause of the late Bronze Age collapse? As Schaefer examines the surrounding area, it becomes clear to him the most likely location for a city is a mound, just a few hundred meters east towards the coast. When Schaefer's team break ground, they aren't disappointed. Slowly, they reveal the ruins of a great city and port.
The big question for Schaefer is, why had this port been abandoned? It's got fantastic coastal access to Asia Minor, to Egypt. It's a gateway port for the civilizations further inland. So what happened there?
The end of the Late Bronze Age was a time of great confusion and chaos. Was its proximity to the sea a reason? It was thought that attacks from the sea were rife at this time in history. Was this the work of the Sea People? Buried among the remains, he uncovers something incredible. An inscribed clay tablet. Could it offer a clue? But there's a problem. It's written in a language that Schaefer has never seen before.
They're just a bit larger than kind of palm-sized, and they're incised with triangular wedge-shaped signs. It's this type of writing known as cuneiform.
Cuneiform is not a language, but it's a way of writing language. Basically, a reed that's cut to form a wedge, and you take the wedge and you push it into clay, and you make pictures, basically. You make objects.
So when you find cuneiform tablets, clay tablets with this type of writing on them, you would expect that the language that they're written in to be Akkadian, which is the language of Babylonia. But these weren't. These were written in an entirely different language. It was something they'd never seen before.
What was the ancient port city Schaefer had uncovered? And what was this indecipherable language? As more and more tablets are unearthed, it becomes clear that they could be the key to understanding just what these ruins were. Could they offer any clues for why this city was abandoned? Had this port been destroyed by the Sea People? And was the destruction linked to the collapse of the Bronze Age? Schaefer has them sent to Paris. Perhaps here, their true meaning can be realized. In Paris, some of France's finest ancient language experts look over the cuneiform tablets. This script is unlike anything they've seen before.
At the time in the Late Bronze Age, the lingua franca was Akkadian, and Akkadian is written in a syllabic system. When we say it's a syllabic system, it means that there is a different sign for every syllable. And in order to render a language fully in this, you need about 200 or 300 signs.
But as they examine these tablets, they discover something shocking. This new language is alphabetic. It's a much more sophisticated writing style than any cuneiform script they've seen before.
In an alphabetic system, you only need one sign for each sound, in which case you need between 20 or 30 signs. Now, if you just compare these, 200 to 300, 20 to 30, it makes an alphabetic system of writing much easier to understand, much easier to learn.
The tablets Schaefer unearthed are believed to be one of the earliest known alphabetic writing systems in the world. And soon, they begin to give up their secrets.
The tablets revealed the city Schaefer has found was called Ugarit.
This is Ugarit now.
Claude Schaefer had uncovered a huge site of vastly significant proportions. There were rows and rows of streets in a very complicated grid pattern. There were temples, there were private dwellings that were rich with artifacts and evidence of very rich furnishings. There was a library, there was this link to the port on the coast.
The scale of construction is clear to Schaefer, and the discovery of one of the world's first alphabetic languages indicates the inhabitants were a highly sophisticated people. But Schaefer has no idea what this civilization is, or why they disappeared. To have any hope of answering these questions, he first needs to know when Ugarit existed. As excavations continue, Schaefer's team begin to uncover more and more tablets. From these, it's possible to date the existence of Ugarit. It rose to power as a wealthy city on the northeastern coast of the Mediterranean around 1450 BCE. The tablets also provide a lot of information about how Ugarit became so rich.
The position of Ugarit in the late Bronze Age was something similar to Rotterdam or Hamburg at the end of a trade route involving big rivers. In Ugarit's case, it was at the shortest distance from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea.
It would have brought in goods from as far away as Afghanistan to the east, things like lapis lazuli, ebony and gold from Sudan in the south, amber, which was brought down from the Baltic states to the north.
These tablets offer archaeologists a wealth of information on the lives of Ugarit's inhabitants, particularly its wealthy merchants.
One of these was Rapanu. He lived in a very big house, and in this house, about 450 tablets were found. And these clay tablets really help us understand how these merchants ran their business. One of the things that Rapanu did was to supply pack animals, and he also dealt in the long-distance trade of metals and other goods. A letter in the Rapanu archive shows how merchants dealt with each other when things went wrong. A merchant in Syria had cast some copper ingots for Rapanu, but these had not arrived. So he writes to Rapanu and says, "You send the donkeys and I'll send the copper," which is a very contemporaneous voice, really, for how one merchant would deal with another.
And the other tablets mention trade in the material that the age is named after, bronze. For Bronze Age civilizations, getting a hold of the raw minerals for smelting bronze was vital in ensuring their survival.
All of the weapons at that time were made of bronze, and it's crucial, therefore, to get the copper and the tin to make these. It was important for them to get copper from Cyprus, but also to get tin from what is today the Badakhshan region of Afghanistan.
The tablets also reveal details of the personal lives of Ugarit's royal family.
We have stories about marriages breaking up and coming together. We get a real sense of political machinations, back and forth, maneuvering, rivalries. It is like a late Bronze Age Game of Thrones.
And it was a throne highly sought after. Ugarit gained vast prosperity due to its prime location as a trading hub sandwiched between Egypt, whose pharaohs ruled the highly fertile Nile Delta, and the monarchs of the Hittite Empire, the two economic powerhouses of the day.
That perfect position of Ugarit meant that the merchants who lived there were brilliantly placed to exploit these trade networks in all kinds of different directions, and this was how the wealth from all four directions of the globe poured into the city.
The people of Ugarit experienced a period of great wealth by taking advantage of this late Bronze Age trade network. And the effects of their prosperity can be seen in the many luxury items Claude Schaefer uncovered. In Paris, the Louvre Museum holds an astonishing treasure trove of beautiful objects discovered by Schaefer. For Claude Schaefer, these artifacts indicate that the people of Ugarit lived a truly cosmopolitan lifestyle. But something about the position they were discovered in doesn't make sense. These items were buried in the ground, like they had been purposefully left behind. Why would the people of Ugarit discard such beautiful and obviously valuable objects? As the archaeologists expand the excavation, they uncover evidence that may give them an answer. Collapsed ceilings and terraces in the city's residential quarters, Crucially, among the broken buildings, they discover a distinct ash layer. Ugarit experienced wide-scale burning.
At Ugarit, because we find so many valuable objects in the ground, it means that there was an imminent threat, that they had to leave quickly.
The people of Ugarit were forced to flee the city's destruction.
Ugarit, this thriving, cosmopolitan, wealthy, exciting city of the late Bronze Age, is suddenly destroyed and abandoned almost overnight. What seems to have happened is that people fled the city pretty rapidly. They don't seem to have time to take all of their belongings with them. We found in a number of different parts of the city these buried caches of treasures where people deposited or hid their goods, and they took what they could with them and fled.
Where did the inhabitants of Ugarit go after they fled the city? And we don't have an answer to that. There are no tablets from any other cities that say, the refugees from Ugarit have arrived. This is one of the many mysteries that accompanies this whole period.
It seems that the inhabitants of Ugarit vanish at this point in history. And the discovery of the destruction layers, along with the buried caches of luxury items, indicate that whatever brought about the end of the city was sudden. But what could have caused it? Archaeologists scour the cuneiform tablets for any clues. They find one, not for the cause of the destruction, but rather when it happened.
There is one tablet that mentions a solar eclipse, and that eclipse has been dated to the 21st of January in 1192 BC. That means the city cannot have been destroyed before that time. So most archaeologists put its destruction somewhere between 1190 and 1185 BC.
Archaeologists have a date range for the destruction of Ugarit, and they soon realize something. Ugarit's disappearance at this particular point in history isn't unique. Between 1200 and 1150 BCE, the great civilizations of the Hittites, the Egyptians, and the Mycenaeans also began to crumble. It marks the end of the Bronze Age. What or who could have wreaked such destruction that an entire period of human history came to an end? Could Ugarit hold the answer? The archaeologists look again to the clay tablets found at Ugarit. Here, they make a startling discovery. A letter from Ugarit's King Amurapi to the king of nearby Alashia, what is now modern-day Cyprus.
King Amurapi's letter on this clay tablet, it's horrible to read because it's just man who's obviously desperate. He's reporting that his city, his town, is surrounded by ships. It says, "The enemy ships are already here. They've set fire to my towns and have done very great damage in the country." He must be utterly desperate to beg other cities for help.
The letter offers a breakthrough. Ugarit's countryside had been sacked, and the city itself was besieged from the sea. Who were the marauding seamen who destroyed Ugarit? And were they linked to the collapse of the Bronze Age? Archaeologists turn to other civilizations in the eastern Mediterranean. Perhaps there was evidence of similar attacks on other empires. And of all the civilizations in this region, the Egyptian Empire was the Bronze Age superpower.
One of the reasons why they are so well off is they control the gold that's coming from Nubia and the Sudan. So Egypt becomes very rich, very powerful, The other aspect that contributed to the Egyptians' prosperity and power is the Nile.
In this very arid land, if you could manage this constant source of water, then you could grow food. And if you could grow food, then you could have a standing army. And if you could have a standing army, then you could rule this entire region.
To hold on to their power, the Egyptians needed their army. And the Egyptian pharaohs were very diligent at recording the details of their military exploits.
Ramesses III was the king of propaganda. The Temple of Medinet Habu is a monument to the exploits of Ramesses III. It tells of the battles he won, of the people he defeated, of all of his successful military campaigns. And they're all depicted on these reliefs across the whole temple.
The pharaohs in ancient Egypt were all powerful and were seen as living gods. But hieroglyphs commissioned by Ramesses III show that despite all their power and their supposed immortality, the Egyptian pharaohs were not above attack. As the hieroglyphs were translated, they offered archaeologists a breakthrough.
These inscriptions revealed that there was a group of people that basically attacking the pharaoh, that were attacking Egypt.
These battles have been dated to between 1177 and 1174 BCE, right around the time of the late Bronze Age collapse. Crucially, the hieroglyphs detail a previously unknown group of people arriving by sea, an armada of marauders, unified together and strong enough to attack the mighty Egyptians. They are christened the Sea People. Could they be the same group who attacked Ugarit? But who were they? The carved reliefs of these battles offer archaeologists some clues.
They're different peoples. You've got people wearing skirts with feathered hats. You've got other men wearing horns and skull caps. They're obviously a mix of various different peoples from around the Mediterranean.
From the ancient Egyptian carvings, archaeologists identify at least 9 different groups. The individual origins of the Sea People is still a mystery.
We have a real problem in identifying the 9 groups that are mentioned as making up the Sea Peoples. I would surmise that each of the names mentioned is a different ethnicity.
But there is one ethnicity mentioned that archaeologists have a suspect for. In the Medinet Habu relief, they're known as the Peleset. In the Old Testament of the Bible, they're the Philistines. Around the time of the Egyptian attacks, the Bible details stories of another invasion into Israelite land by the Philistines. Their champion warrior was Goliath.
We're pretty sure that the Peleset of the Sea Peoples are the Philistines mentioned in the Bible.
It looks like Ugarit, Egypt, and the Israelites were attacked by the Sea People. But how likely is it that these multi-ethnic groups launched coordinated assaults against the superpowers of the day? Could their combined efforts have caused the collapse of the Bronze Age?
My view is that there were no joint chiefs of staff of Sea Peoples or hostile invaders out there. There's nobody sitting in the Pentagon saying, right, you guys go to Ashkelon, you guys go and hit Egypt. That was not how it was.
Surely a disjointed group of seaborne marauders couldn't have destroyed Ugarit, let alone end an entire period of history. There must be another explanation for what caused the collapse of the Bronze Age. For Claude Schaefer, it's clear the Sea People didn't destroy Ugarit, but what could have? Searching for answers, Schaefer decides to seek help from one of the eminent archaeologists of the day.
As Schaefer's career takes off, he manages to get in with all of the top archaeologists of his era. This includes Arthur Evans, who's famous for discovering Knossos in the island of Crete. So Evans and Schaefer form a bond and they start writing to each other.
Knossos, like Ugarit, had experienced wide-scale destruction towards the end of the Late Bronze Age, followed by the disappearance of the Minoan civilization.
The natural person to have talked to would have been Arthur Evans. Evans had already done quite a lot of careful work at the site, and his theory was that it had been destroyed by an earthquake.
Arthur Evans is the father figure of earthquake archaeology. He started systematically documenting both the damage and the destruction layers at Knossos and interpreting them in a context of these episodic seismic catastrophes. Evans really brought out the fact that seismic catastrophes could have widespread effect. The bigger the earthquake, the more regional destruction you should see.
For Schaefer, it's a tantalizing thought. An earthquake would explain the destruction of Ugarit, collapsed buildings, followed by large-scale burning, a result of fires knocked over during the quake. And this region is riddled with earthquake fault lines.
When Schaefer was excavating Ugarit, he found evidence for several earthquakes. It looks like there may have been a sequence or a storm of earthquakes that took place over a period of about 50 years, from about 1225 down to 1175 BC.
The evidence Schaefer uncovered indicated that Ugarit had been destroyed by an earthquake, right at the point the Bronze Age collapsed. The revelation is profound, and it leads him to draw a much wider conclusion.
He actually thought that the end of the Bronze Age had been caused by one huge catastrophic earthquake.
Had Schaefer revealed the culprit for Ugarit's destruction? And did a series of earthquake storms wreak so much havoc that the entire Bronze Age collapsed? The theory has a problem.
The reality is that when earthquakes strike a city, even if it completely destroys the city, the people rebuild. You know, that's where their homes are, that's where their families are, that's where their friends and families have died. That's where all the rubble is they can rebuild with. Where else did they go? It's a very rare occurrence that an earthquake would be conceived to destroy a whole civilization.
So if Ugarit wasn't deserted after an earthquake, what caused its population to abandon the city? And was its destruction linked to the collapse of the Late Bronze Age? Maverick American scholar Rhys Carpenter is invited to the University of Cambridge to deliver the prestigious J.H. Gray Classics Lecture. Carpenter specializes in the ancient Greek civilization of Mycenaean. He has a radical theory for the collapse of the Late Bronze Age. Carpenter challenges the two prevailing reasons, earthquakes or invasions. He argues that both these possible causes are rarely catastrophic enough to bring about the total collapse of a society. Instead, in his view, the only explanation for such a complete destruction of Mycenae and large migration of its people is environmental, a severe drought, followed by famine.
Rhys Carpenter, for the first time, brought climate into the debate concerning the end of the Bronze Age and the reasons behind it. He was well known for being a broad thinker about problems, but this really marked, for the first time, bringing meteorology, climatology into the archaeological debate.
It's a radical thought. A severe region-wide drought could create a famine large enough to destabilize the Late Bronze Age civilizations. But to back up the theory, Carpenter needs scientific proof. Here, he runs into a problem.
When Rhys Carpenter put forward this theory, there was not enough specific meteorological data available to substantiate it in detail for the regions that experienced destruction at the end of the Late Bronze Age.
But there could be other proof. Buried among the clay tablets found at Ugarit, archaeologists uncover a text, a letter sent from the Hittite kings, pleading for help.
We've got a number of tablets in Ugarit and tablets down to Egypt in which the Hittite kings have said that there are famines up there, that their people are starving. I mean, imagine the proud Hittites stooping to have to ask the Egyptians and the people in Ugarit for assistance.
And the famine gets worse.
After we've gotten requests from the Hittites to the people in Ugarit for help, then the people in Ugarit have to ask for help themselves from the Egyptians.
But without ancient climatological data, it's impossible to know for certain whether this crisis affected the entire Eastern Mediterranean. And without this, it's impossible to say whether drought and famine caused the collapse of the late Bronze Age. And in the case of Ugarit, drought and famine doesn't explain one puzzling piece of evidence: why the wealthy people here buried and left behind their most treasured possessions.
So just imagine you're living in this opulent town. You yourself are a rich merchant. You have all of these tools, these rare jewels. You abandon all of it. Why would you do that? The only reason that you would leave all of your worldly possessions behind and get out is if you had to do it in a rush. Otherwise, you'd pack. You'd maybe work out the best route. None of them did this. All they did was get out of that city as fast as they possibly could.
If we have all the inhabitants fleeing, cleaning out their goods and running, this can only mean that they were facing a significant and immediate threat.
If drought caused the people of Ugarit to abandon their city, these objects would have been taken with them. The evidence points to the inhabitants rapidly fleeing the city. It would be consistent with an invasion. But was there any evidence that Ugarit's destruction was at the hands of an enemy force? Archaeologists revisit Ugarit's destruction layer. Among the buried luxury items, collapsed structures and wide-scale burning, they hit the jackpot. Evidence that they believe shows the city was attacked and destroyed.
Excavations revealed arrowheads dispersed across areas where people lived and in streets. There'd been some kind of house-to-house fighting in the last days of Ugarit. Tying in with texts, we do know that the people of Ugarit were concerned about incursions from the sea at this point.
Was the city's destruction caused by the sea people after all? According to the Medinet Habu hieroglyphs, Egypt's battles with the sea people took place between 1177 and 1174 BCE. If archaeologists could pin a date on Ugarit's destruction, then perhaps the two attacks could be linked. Were the same perpetrators responsible for both spates of violence? In order to pinpoint when the attack on Ugarit took place, a team of scientists have turned to the ruin of Gibala, 35 kilometers south of Ugarit. Here, like at Ugarit, they have uncovered evidence the site was destroyed. And when archaeologists radiocarbon dated the destruction layer, they uncovered something incredible.
The radiocarbon dates put a date on the destruction of Gibala, 1190 to 1194 BC. And it would seem highly likely that, as it's so close to Ugarit, that might have happened at roughly the same time as the attack on Ugarit, which resulted in its final destruction.
Ugarit was destroyed only 10 to 15 years before Egypt was attacked by the Sea People. Ugarit was facing an armada of hostile ships. It's clear that seaborne marauders were raiding cities along the eastern Mediterranean coast. Could they be responsible for the collapse of the late Bronze Age? archaeologists look to other late Bronze Age civilizations, the possibility becomes much more likely.
In the Mycenaean world, the archaeological evidence is strong at this period of time for the destruction of the palaces at Mycenae and Tiryns, for example. So buildings burnt, reasons behind that, not sure. It's unclear who the agents of destruction were, but destroyed these palaces were at the end of the Bronze Age.
And the destruction of civilizations across this region is so complete that writing simply stops.
So in the Mycenaean world, writing was primarily in the form of record keeping for the state bureaucracy, keeping accounts of what kind of goods were being brought in from different parts of the realm and what were being distributed. Things that were coming in perhaps as taxes and things that were being paid out as wages or salaries. In the Hittite Empire, it's largely the same. So when these state entities disappear, the need for writing disappears too.
It's impossible to know whether Mycenae was destroyed by the Sea People, but the destruction does fit the time frame for the late Bronze Age collapse. What is clear, though, is the Sea People were a multi-ethnic group working together to attack the great civilizations of the day. And as more and more destroyed sites are uncovered, the scale of the attacks is staggering. Most coastal cities, from Pylos in Greece down to Gaza, were razed to the ground. The destruction was so severe that many were abandoned. Was there a cause for such an exceptional situation?
The societies of the late Bronze Age are extremely hierarchical. These are highly exploitative systems. So for the great majority of the population, who would have been in the very bottom rung of the social ladder, this was not necessarily a great place to be. And it probably wouldn't take very much. A couple of years of bad harvests, not being able to feed your family, not being able to meet the taxation demands being imposed on you. Just something like that might be enough to push you into statelessness, to push you into wandering, raiding, that kind of extra-legal activity. Mobile groups moving around the landscape, behaving outside the law.
Life in the late Bronze Age Mediterranean could be volatile. Taking to the sea and raiding out of necessity could make sense as a motivation for the Sea People. Archaeologists look again to the Medinet Habu reliefs in Egypt. A closer examination provides a possible key clue.
On the relief of this depiction of this mighty battle, there were not just soldiers, but there were women, children, carriages. And so this isn't just simply a major battle of these sea peoples attacking the Egyptians, but it's an actual migration of people coming into the area. Looking at the whole picture of the Mediterranean at this time, there was this Doric invasion into the Balkans. And then there were invasions from the Balkans into Asia Minor, and then into Asia Minor into Cyprus, and then from Cyprus down the coast of what's modern-day Lebanon. And it was this domino effect that had essentially started in the Aegean and worked its way all around the Eastern Mediterranean. And it was these sea peoples who were attacking the coast, looking for a place to live.
The theory would make sense. It was looking like the collapse of the Bronze Age was brought about by a series of invasions, followed by a migration crisis. But was there any evidence to back up the theory? Dr. Philip W. Stockhammer is an archaeogeneticist who specializes in analyzing ancient DNA. Stockhammer examined ancient human remains uncovered in Ashkelon, an ancient seaport in the Levant, a region that covered modern-day Israel, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Crucially, in the late Bronze Age, this region of the Levant was inhabited by a group of people known as the Philistines. It's long been suspected that the Philistines are one of a group of ethnicities that made up the Sea People? Could DNA analysis shed light on their ethnic makeup and whether they had immigrated into the area?
Eine große Frage in der Archäologie der späten Bronzezeit war ja der Zusammenbruch um 1200 und in diesem Zusammenhang spielen die sogenannten Philister immer eine große Rolle. Und wir hatten nun die Möglichkeit, mit unseren genetischen Analysen Individuen aus Aschkelon, also einer dieser sogenannten Philisterstädte, zu analysieren. Wir haben also aus Aschkelon zunächst Individuen aus der späten Bronzezeit, also der Zeit vor 1200 vor Christus, analysiert und konnten sehen, dass die Bewohner aus Aschkelon genetisch genauso aussahen wie alle anderen Bewohner an der südlichen Levante.
But when Dr. Stockhammer analyzed DNA from the remains of 4 children buried after 1200 BCE, the results were starkly different.
Diese 4 Kinder hatten eine genetische Komponente, die wir so bislang im Ostmittelmeerraum nicht fassen können, die wir aber aus der Zeit aus Süditalien oder aus Griechenland kennen. Fassen wir hiermit vielleicht die Migration einer Bevölkerungsgruppe, die uns dann aus der Bibel später als Philister bekannt ist? Haben wir hier quasi jetzt endlich den genetischen Beleg für die Mobilität von Menschen an die südliche Levante? Ich glaube schon. Ärzte, Künstler, Händler, aber eben auch Söldner sind über viele hunderte, vielleicht sogar viele tausende Kilometer auf Schiffen oder in Karawanen unterwegs gewesen und man war eben eng miteinander vernetzt.
Dr. Stockhammer believes he has found evidence that the Philistines, one of the only known ethnic groups that made up the Sea People, did migrate into the Levant. It backs up further written evidence from the late Bronze Age, documenting a mass movement of people into the eastern Mediterranean. Crucially, this migration occurred around 1200 BCE. After this year, civilizations in this region began to collapse. But what could have driven the Sea People from their homes and forced them to attack Ugarit, the Hittite and the Egyptian empires? And were they the cause for the collapse of the Bronze Age? To understand what could have led the Sea People to make this life-changing decision, we need to know what the Eastern Mediterranean was like at this point in time. Paleoclimatologists drew sediment core samples from the seafloor around the Eastern Mediterranean. By charting the buildup of sediment, it's possible to build up a history of ancient climate.
What we see is a change in sea temperature. It's actually a drop of about 2 to 4 degrees. The sea gets colder. And that in itself would have a catastrophic impact on the rain patterns that people would have expected. Colder temperatures lead to less intense rainfall, which in turn leads to drought, which in turn leads to failed harvests. And that means people starve.
Just as Rhys Carpenter proposed in 1965, it was evidence of drought leading to a famine in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Now, 50 years later, we have the scientific data that Carpenter was lacking, and it looks like he was completely right, that drought was one of the factors that brought an end not just to the Mycenaeans in Greece, but also to many of the other cultures and civilizations in the lands surrounding Greece as well.
For the people living through this drought, they would have faced dire conditions.
In the Bronze Age, people would have known about prosperous places on the coast of the Levant and would have perhaps attempted to go there in order to access the food supplies.
Imagine living on an island in Greece and the harvests fail and you're hungry. Do you watch your family slowly die, watch your neighbours turn on each other, or do you get in your boats?
For people living in the communities along the Aegean coast, sailing would have been part of everyday life.
You have young men well-versed in military tactics, able to commandeer ships in order to try and secure crops.
It's believed these groups of people left their doomed civilizations behind to become the multi-ethnic group we know as the Sea People.
So not bloodthirsty killers for the sake of it, but rather people under extreme stress, looking for food and looking to save their own people.
It's believed the Sea People unleashed a rain of opportunistic attacks and invasions against the wealthy civilizations that bordered the Eastern Mediterranean.
What we call the Sea Peoples today are most likely people from the Aegean by way of Crete, and then from there came to the eastern shore of the Mediterranean looking for new lands. And it doesn't appear that it was one quick invasion, but rather a slow migration over a period of many, many decades.
I don't think we'll ever know for sure who the Sea People are, but for me, at least part of the equation has got to be a large proportion of the population who was disaffected, dissatisfied, disenfranchised, unable to feed themselves, rootless, stateless people who are reduced to raiding, piratical behavior, and who take out their anger and frustration in violence, in rioting, in looting, in tearing down the palaces of people who they might have seen as their oppressors.
It's thought some places were merely pillaged, but in others, the attackers found somewhere to establish a new home.
We often accuse the Sea Peoples, the Philistines, and the other groups that are there as being plunderers and people who just came in and destroyed everything in order to create their new land. But is that not what every colonizing group does? I mean, this is what colonizers have done throughout history.
And it's believed that attacks by the Sea People became increasingly more potent as conditions deteriorated around the Eastern Mediterranean.
Schaeffer was not wrong. There was an earthquake. It just wasn't the only thing that was going on at the time. Personally, I think that's how we get the perfect storm. It wasn't just an earthquake. It wasn't just the Sea Peoples. It wasn't just the famine. It was everything.
I think what you've got is this combination of a series of events that begin to compound on one another. And that caused the major superpowers, the Hittites and the Egyptians, to basically wane, to retreat.
Great civilization after great civilization collapsed. It led to the end of the Bronze Age. In the chaos that followed, a dark age descended across the region.
This is where they've forgotten how to write. But what we in particular get are a number of smaller kingdoms and smaller city-states that reform, pick up, and continue in what is essentially a power vacuum that's been left by the collapse of the late Bronze Age kingdoms and empires.
The Sea Peoples had the audacity to attack the Egyptian Empire, the ancient Greeks, and the wealthy city of Ugarit. While we may never know their true identity, these mysterious people had a profound effect on the late Bronze Age.
I do not think that the late Bronze Age collapse would have occurred if it were not for the Sea Peoples being in the mix.